The U.S. Secretary of State visits Qatar to help end one of the worst disputes to hit the Gulf region in decades. But with mixed signals coming from the White House, will Rex Tillerson's shuttle diplomacy ease tensions? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. It's been over a month now since Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain and Egypt cut off diplomatic ties with Qatar and imposed an economic blockade. The US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is in the region hoping to broker an end to the standoff. He made his second stop here in Qatar after visiting Kuwait on Monday. Tillerson is also expected to go to Saudi Arabia and Bahrain on this trip. Tillerson has spoken to the emir of Qatar and says Qatar has been clear in its positions, calling them reasonable. The Saudi-led group has accused Qatar of supporting terrorism, an allegation the Qatari government has strongly denied. Now, the Saudi-led group is also accusing Qatar of violating deals it signed with the GCC back in 2013 and 2014. The agreements reportedly involved ending support for opposition groups in the region, as well as in Egypt and Yemen. And many of the demands that were recently made to lift the blockade against Qatar were already included in that agreement. The group now says Qatar has violated it. But Qatar says it is the blockading countries who violated the agreement by interfering in its internal affairs. Now, since the start of this diplomatic crisis, the US government's position has been unclear at times. President Donald Trump came out in support of the Saudi-led group's actions by accusing Qatar of being a funder of terrorism. But the US State Department took a more neutral position and urged the Arab states to ease the blockade on Qatar. The US government then signed a $12 billion arms deal with Qatar 6 days into the crisis. Well, let's bring in our guests now. Joining us here in Doha, we have Shafeeq Ghabra, Professor of Political Science at Kuwait University. In London, Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, former Qatari ambassador to the US and the UN. And in Washington, Andrew Bowen, a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Welcome, all of you. So, Shafeeq, let me start with you then. What hopes, if any, do you have for Tillerson's trip in the region right now? What does he bring in terms of trying to mediate this crisis?
I think he brings a lot. The way he started, Turkey, Kuwait, where the effort for mediation began. And then the ability to meet today with the emir and the foreign minister and to sign an agreement that takes a big issue out of the window, somehow gets Qatar closer to the US at a certain level or another, and then move to Jeddah. So I think we've seen the crisis come to some sort of a plateau, some sort of a climax. We are in the beginning of the escalation.
But what sort of leverage does the United States have to influence the outcome of this?
It has a lot of leverage. It has to only play it right. It has to be able to talk to all the parties. It has to be able to see what are the major concerns. At the same time, Qatar has clarified its position regarding the blockade and ending the blockade, while all the others need to come to some sort of an understanding of how you de-escalate and where it all ends. So I think there is a lot of leverage. Keep in mind that when this crisis began, it began in a context of the Trump administration's position, particularly President Trump's position, the role some of his consultants played. And then finally, we have the Secretary of State say, this is the way to go. And it looks that today the Secretary of State is having his way in dealing with the crisis.
Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, what do you read into what is an apparent stepping up of diplomatic efforts from the West? We have Tillerson here, we had the British Foreign Minister Boris Johnson here a couple of days earlier. I mean, and how is that being coordinated with the Kuwaiti efforts at mediation?
I think it is a fact of life that the United States, Britain, and other Western countries, as well as Japan and China and Russia, they are all interested to have this crisis the most dangerous crisis after the invasion of Kuwait in 1990 to be solved. This crisis is affecting everybody. It's not good to all the countries involved. It's not good to the region security. It's affecting security, affecting the fight against terrorism, affecting the energy market, affecting world trade, and more important, it is affecting the people of the region, because Qatar found itself early of the morning of 24th to be a victim of hacking of its news agencies, and after that, a few days later, the severing of relations without any warning, and after that, a severe blockade in the holy month of Ramadan while people were fasting. So I think the United States, as the most important country in the world, as the leader of the free world, a country which has a lot of interest in the region, in the Gulf, military, business, political, and which with the GCC, they are all coordinating and fighting terrorism and trying to keep this area, the only area in the Middle East which is yet stable, to be stable and not to be affected by what's happening around it. You know, the region is, the GCC countries are surrounded with fires. You have the situation in Iraq, the war in Yemen, the situation in Syria, and also other regional powers which feel that it is their chance to expand. So Kuwait is playing very positive role. Sheikh Sabah, don't forget, is one of the founding father of the GCC. And you know, with Mr. Tillerson and Mr. Johnson here, I think that shows you the importance. And today, with Tillerson meeting in Doha, I think we can see the efforts is taking a new step, which hopefully will lead to a solution. Not today, but hopefully in the future.
Andrew Bowen, is it clear at this point that Tillerson is even speaking for the United States and not just his own department? I mean, we mentioned there the mixed signals coming out of the US, President Trump saying one thing firmly in support of Saudi Arabia, it seemed, and then the State Department and Defense Department as well saying something else. I mean, what do you still see that as a problem?
I think that it got off to a rough start, but now there's a pretty clear position that Secretary Tillerson is both representing not only the State Department but the U.S. government. I think there are still communication issues, but the Department of Defense, as well as State, are pretty much executing right now to resolve this crisis. So I think, regardless of some communication in the White House, I think we have a process now, which we didn't have in the beginning.
Shafeeq, Ghabra, we understand Tillerson was reportedly saying that there are elements in these demands that in his eyes could work, but he didn't elaborate on that. Do you think there are areas of common ground here? And what would they be?
I'm not sure how and in what direction. I think this needs real scrutiny to really look at it. I mean, exactly what is meant by opposition. I mean, is it somebody that gave their opinion? What is meant by, I mean, everybody has opposition, everybody has opinion, everybody writes, we are in a very open world today. So what is meant by these? What is it meant by people who've been given citizenship, who were in another GCC states? How do you get into these issues? So maybe there are some issues, and I'm assuming there will be some issues that could be the basis for a formula, let me call it a face-saving formula, from all that escalation into something. But let me also say, once things normalize, people get back, maybe the GCC can be saved still with the efforts of Sheikh Sabah, the Emir of Kuwait. But I believe there is a change, there is a regional change, there is a regional shift, and that will have an impact. Also, the Turks are now within EU base. So there is a regional shift that we have to see that there will be results for such an escalation. But the best case scenario is de-escalation and at least getting back to where we were just before the 5th of June 2017.
I want to ask you as well, because we can get into what this means for the region as a whole in more detail a little bit later, but I want to ask you as well about the release of these documents that we mentioned at the top of the program from 2013 and 2014. What do you read in, because this was leaked just a day before Tillerson arrived here. What do you read into the timing of that?
I think that these documents are irrelevant. And I build this from the orientation that look where the conflict went. Look at what the ambassador of the United Arab Emirates was doing in Washington. I mean, how does this live to the spirit of the document as well? So when you look at it, maybe everybody did not commit to whatever they said. And let me add one thing. When a group of states, one state or two states, a bigger state, somehow imposes partially or more its will on a smaller state, it's more likely that the smaller state later on is going to find loopholes that go along with its own interests. And so what we see is that we have several GCC states together. They're not exactly on the same look and the same ideas, the same thinking. They're trying to get closer, but it's more ceremonial. Not much has happened. Even when we speak about the central bank, at some point, Saudi Arabia, UAE did not agree where would the headquarters be. So these sovereign states are always destined to have issues. The question always is going to be, how can they rationalize their differences? I mean, look at Oman. It's totally different. Look at Kuwait. It has its own approach, its own style, its own balances. Look at UAE. It has its own experiment and it's gone way into its experiment. Look at Saudi Arabia. It's the big hegemon. It's the big country in the region with impact on everybody, positively or negatively. So altogether, that has to be seen with respect. The way Europeans at some point were able to develop that respect between Britain and France and Germany, and even when they differ today with leaving the European unity, they're going to negotiate for 5-6 years. So it can't all be done by power and by de facto imposing.
Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, as a former ambassador, do you worry about what this spells for the GCC as a group in the future? Because even if there is a solution here, it may only be kind of on the surface, papering over the cracks. I mean, do you worry that the wounds from this dispute go too deep now?
I think the GCC received a very heavy blow. And the GCC is almost gone, because for these three countries of the GCC, which with Egypt blockaded Qatar, they failed to apply the mechanism of the GCC. As a matter of fact, they failed to apply the mechanism which were included in the two agreements of 2013 and 2014. So yes, I am worried about the GCC. We need the GCC to be strong. We are part of the GCC countries. All these countries, we are the same people, the same tribe, the same families. And for us, the existence of the GCC should be for our future generation. But the GCC, where we are all equal, where human rights are protected, where no one country is trying to impose its will on the others, but everything is, any decision has to be taken through negotiation, through discussion, and if there are differences, you know, there are mechanisms to be used to solve such disputes. You know, the way they acted, especially the three GCC, i.e. Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain, was out of character of GCC culture, you know, imposing a blockade, dividing families, kicking Qatari citizens from their cities, forcing their people to leave Qatar. You know, that is not acceptable. That is not part of our culture. We are the same people. If you look at my last name, you will find my family in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, and in other places. and that is applicable to other families and other tribes. So yes, the GCC is really reeling. Is it going to be back working for our interests as people and as governments? I hope so.
Andrew Bowen, the longer this dispute goes on, what implications does it have for the United States, given that the Middle East as region as a whole right now is suffering from a lot of instability and conflicts right now, Syria, Yemen, and Libya, and so on, and the GCC is seen as really the only kind of relatively stable region within that, and if the US is working on the diplomatic front here to show a united front in the war, in the battle against ISIS and other groups like that, how important is it that they find a solution to this?
I think this is quite a critical moment because when President Trump visited the region and went to Riyadh, he delivered a very clear message, and that was that the GCC under Saudi leadership initially was supposed to kind of bring the region together to confront both Iran and also radical Islam. And neither of those are being done now, because instead you have Qatar and Turkey divided on one side with Abu Dhabi and Riyadh. And I think as long as these divisions continue, the President Trump's own initiatives in the region will continue to be kind of undone by this infighting. And at the core of what this administration would like to do to defeat it, rolling back ISIS and also rolling back Iran, is essentially working with our Gulf partners. But when we don't have Gulf partners who can work together, that is a critical flaw and a critical problem, both for our own national security, but also, frankly, for the security of the region. That if you look at Saudi Arabia's long-term security interests in the region, the longer that there's fighting within the GCC, you see Tehran gaining ground. And I think that is something at the core of why this crisis has been so problematic, and why Secretary Tillerson is spending a week there, is because the longer this goes on, no one wins. And that is why I think it's incredibly important, the agreement that was announced today on terrorism financing. I think steps are going forward, but really the message at Riyadh seems to be lost to basically settling of scores between Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and Doha, which is not really what the president would like.
Do you think that the Saudi-led coalition kind of overplayed their hand here, thinking that they had just unqualified support from the U.S. in the form of President Trump?
I think they both misread Washington, but they also misread Berlin, Paris, and London. And also they equally misread Qatar's own reaction. I think you could arguably say that they thought that this would provoke either an immediate capitulation, as some of their columnists argued, or, frankly, a change in government in Doha. Neither of those things happened. And now you look at kind of no real strategy. And that is where it's kind of like they've climbed up on a tree branch and looking how do they come down from it. And certainly Qatar has had to make moves as well to improve relations. But right now it seems that all sides are really kind of needing to come to the table, because there's no real strategy forward beyond kind of the status quo. And as we've seen, no one is really... The idea that Qatar will collapse because they don't have economic ties with Saudi Arabia have certainly been, that myth has been kind of cleared up pretty clearly by how well Qatar has been able to do under these current circumstances.
Yeah, Shafeeq, Ghabra, you think the Saudis misread this?
I think everybody involved in the blockade underestimated the situation, underestimated the Qatari resolve and their ability to hold well together. Qataris have been reborn in certain ways as a nation, as a country, and they have a lot of options, and they were able to use some of their options. I don't think they've even used all of their options. It's therefore quite quite difficult when countries go all the way against another to get a zero-sum game. Zero-sum games are very problematic, and they really take you nowhere. So this is what I see. Therefore, as a result of this crisis, Qatar has changed. It will continue to take a certain course in its self-reliance and in its port towards the sea and in its airport towards the sky. I think a little bit of de-escalation will take place slowly, normalization. It's up to everybody how they build trust. But I see this part of this regional change. We are again, in a context of a regional change that began in 2011 with different perspectives. Some see the social contract has changed and there has to be a new contract in the region, and some others believe that we can rebuild this old pre-2011 system, which is impossible to do. So these two views are today reflected in the Gulf, but reflected all over the region.
When you talk about the social contract, you're talking about the relationship between leaders and their
leaders and led between governments and people that existed before 2011 is gone, and it's a different world today. That's why we have all that conflict, and today it has reached the shores and the skies of the GCC, and it's really up to us in this region to be able to find a way out of this. I am somebody who calls always for political reform to deal with these issues, reform between big states and small states, but also reform within states in ways that can bring about a better life for citizenship and for populations and for everybody involved and living in this region, rather than have everybody in the region want to leave the region because they are all subjugated to this kind of situation. So that blockade was underestimated the situation, and we are now at a point where maybe everybody is realizing that from the other side.
Nasser bin Hamad Al Khalifa, how do you see this playing out then? You think this is going to be resolved anytime soon?
Well, nobody can predict the future, but I hope it will be solved. It will not be soon. It will take time. People haven't agreed on what issues to discuss. There needs to be scrutinizing the issues. There are some demands which have no place because these demands really contradict the Charter of the United Nations. You know, it's like somebody asking, they are asking Qatar to renegade on its obligation under the Charter of the United Nations. There are accusations which has no place, and those who are accusing, they need to come up with their facts. And but I think now everybody knew that there is only one way. And the only way available to all is really to solve this problem. The more this crisis stays, the more it will affect the security of the Gulf, but also of the whole region. It will affect the fight against terrorism. It will affect energy situation, trade situation. So I am very optimistic that there will be a solution, but it will take some time.
Briefly, in the minute that we got left, Andrew Bowen, how do you see this playing out then?
I think that this could go on for months. I think on the one hand, the U.S.-Qatari relationship can be put on better footing. I think that some tensions can be resolved. I think that there will still be potentially even a IATA ruling on allowing Qatar to have airspace access again, which could gradually allow some more economic trade. But I think it may be, unless Secretary Tillerson is able to really close a deal this week, you could arguably see a few of the leadership in Abu Dhabi going on vacation for several months and letting this drag on. So I think it's 50-50 where this goes. I do think that the calculation now is, if you're sitting in Riyadh or Abu Dhabi, is how much more U.S. support do you actually have to continue this? And I think there will be more and more kind of pressure, particularly as we saw Senator Corker on putting a hold on approving arms sales.
That is where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you to all three of you, Shafeeq, Ghabra, Nasser Al Khalifa, and Andrew Bowen. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you for watching. Remember, you can see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story is where you'll find us. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.